Hello, I am Caitlin D. Clerk.
And I'm Mohammad Garipur.
We are co-founders of the Epidemic Urbanism initiative that we launched in March 2020. It is our sincere pleasure to welcome you to this review meeting for the Epidemic Urbanism Design Competition, Designing for Health and Equity, Supporting Vulnerable Communities in the Post-Pandemic Age. Before we begin, we wanted to take a brief moment to introduce the Epidemic Urbanism initiative. As part of this initiative, we have organized 4 international conferences, edited a forthcoming volume, and convened experts for interviews, which are available on our YouTube channel. Through these efforts, we are happy to mention that Epidemic Urbanism is now a community of about 2,000 people, including experts, policymakers, journalists, faculty, practitioners, students, and members of the public from 91 countries. Our goal is to mobilize this international community, work on projects that lead to real change in our surroundings, regardless of geography, and create an interdisciplinary and open access educational platform, all in service of preventing and responding to this and future epidemics and pandemics in more effective, just, and equitable ways. In continuation of our efforts and with the help of several members of our community, we've been working on this design competition centered on health and equity in order to create a venue to discuss conceptual design ideas that explicitly promote healthy places for vulnerable communities. This design competition seeks to create a venue to promote collaboration across global and disciplinary networks, and by bringing together students, academics, and practitioners from across the world to imagine design solutions that center health, equity, and social justice in a range of different typologies, and that foster resilience in anticipation of future outbreaks of epidemic illnesses and other natural disasters.
For this design competition, we received 52 submissions from 27 countries in 4 categories: senior housing, community clinics, neighborhood schools, and public parks. Each design category was reviewed by 4 jurors consisting of faculty and professionals from different countries and disciplines. Today's meeting will center on 3 shortlisted projects in the category of public parks. Essential to the goals of this competition was the public convening and sharing of juror and commentator feedback to not only celebrate the strength and resonances of shortlisted projects, but also to illuminate broader insights of practice. In the panel today, the jury chair, Bud Schenefeld, and 3 jury members will review 3 shortlisted projects and share their comments on the public park design proposals. We have also invited Naomi Sachs to share her feedback as a commentator on the topic, as well as the selected projects. A recording of this and other review meetings held as part of this competition will be available on our YouTube channel later this month. In just a moment, the panel chair, Bud Schenefeld, will be introducing the jury for this category. Before that, I would like to formally introduce Bud, as well as Naomi Sachs, the commentator for this category of the competition. Bud Schenefeld is a faculty member of architecture at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He is the 2018 to 2022 recipient of the Bachman Professorship in Healthcare Design. He also serves on Rural Prosperity Nebraska's placemaking core team, focusing on the impact of design on rural health. His research focuses on the scholarship of teaching, equitable design education, and health issues unique to rural and isolated populations. Prior to teaching at the University of Nebraska, Bud taught architecture design studios at Auburn University and interior design studios at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Atlanta. Naomi Sachs is an assistant professor at the University of Maryland and founding director of the Therapeutic Landscapes Network. Her research and teaching focus on nature's role in human health and well-being. Naomi is co-author with Claire Cooper Marcus of Therapeutic Landscapes, an evidence-based approach to designing healing gardens and restorative outdoor spaces. Naomi is also the co-editor of the peer-reviewed journal, Health, Environments, Research, and Design. We would like to sincerely thank the session chair, jury, and commentators for their dedication and hard work in the last month, and congratulate all teams, especially those whose work has been shortlisted. With that, we would like to turn to the jury chair, Bud Schenefeld.
But it looks like you're muted.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I want to welcome everyone to Epidemic Urbanism's Public Parks Competition and the announcement of the winning projects, as well as 2 honorable mentions. Thank you so much to Mohammed and Caitlin for organizing this competition and inviting me to participate in the process. I also want to thank the jury for their hard work in reviewing the submissions, as well as their contributions and passionate debate on the merits of the individual proposals. I can attest that this was not an easy process. We were impressed with the variety of submissions, as well as the depth of the submitted work. Our jurors for today's competition are Renelle Sargent from Trinidad and Tobago, Anna Grishting from Switzerland, and Johan Sagan from Norway. As the jury chair, I will share some background on the competition brief, announce the shortlisted projects individually, as well as share short videos developed by the 3 selected shortlisted teams. I will also introduce our jurors in more detail, and each juror will share their thoughts and comments on the work of the shortlisted projects. After we've heard from the 3 jurors, I will announce the winner of Epidemic Urbanism's initiative's Public Parks Competition. We will then have the opportunity to hear from our commentator, Naomi Sachs. Next slide. Epidemic Urbanism's Public Parks Competition focused on promoting equitable access to shared open spaces. The role of public spaces, especially urban parks, in promoting health has received renewed attention in recent months and years. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, public parks were lauded as essential services for urban communities who used parks as sites of recreation, physical activity, and community gathering. Yet, how public are these parks? Considering parks as essential services of themselves, and as places that house a range of services from recreational areas to restrooms to farmers markets. How can we design public parks, a public park that is welcoming to and supportive of a wide range of users? How can the park design bring communities together and encourage social interactions, healthy lifestyles, and happiness among users from ranges of ages, backgrounds, socioeconomic status, and cultural groups? Given this criteria, teams were asked to design a neighborhood park in their city, their town, or their village to serve the local community. I think this criteria is of considering the role of the public park in their place, somewhere very familiar to all of the applicants, is quite unique to a competition and provided such a deep understanding of how essential public spaces are in the post-pandemic age. Next slide, please. I am now pleased to share our shortlisted projects of the Epidemic Urbanism Public Parks Competition. So we will start with Aesthetic of Non-Interference. This team is from Russia. They are the first of the shortlisted projects. And each of the teams, to give you guys a little more information, each of the teams that were shortlisted have provided a short video to show off the work that they've done and further develop an understanding of what they were looking at in those particular projects.
Carnival Park project was developed by a consortium of 3 young bureaus. The Art Bureau was founded in 2019, Aldebaran Bureau opened in 2020, Bureau Outdoor has been working since 2017. All bureaus are specialized on architectural and landscape design and implement projects of public spaces throughout Russia. What unites them is the careful approach to the context and future uses. Tarhanova is a dense birch forest located on the outskirts of Yoshkar-Ola city. The territory has enormous potential and a number of important problems. The land is swampy, and an old hidden main passes through the forest, which cuts the park into two isolated parts. However, the forest is actively used by local residents and therefore needs to be improved. We made a survey which was attended by people of different ages, status, profession, degree of neighborhood, and frequency of visits. This is how we found out how they see the future park and what functions they would like to have there. The project was inspired by the local nature, people, and the belief in paganism. This formed the basis for the following principles: identity, images and design code of the park, non-intervention, we leave the forest untouched, only reanimate and supplement it, variety of scenarios, routes and functions, inclusion, comfortable stay for all social and age groups. We propose an aerial path that runs over the hidden main and connects the torn parts of the forest. The path is functional. It has observation zones, entertainment areas, and places of general gathering. It also acts as a link between the park and the neighboring green zone. The park itself also includes an event area, a sports and children's playground, a dog walking area, and other public functions. This is how a dispersed structure with local implementation of functions ensures the security of interaction and offers a variety of scenarios for using the park, which is relevant in the era of a pandemic.
And the second shortlisted project is Community Escape, with team members from Bangladesh, Alberta, Australia, and Portugal.
Dhaka, the 400 years old Mughal capital, today is the capital of Bangladesh, with more than 17 million people living on 1,530 square kilometers. Resultantly, as we can see here, Dhaka's open spaces are disappearing incredibly fast from the city fabric. Further, COVID-19 pandemic caused a major halt in Dhaka's limited public spaces. Thus, for sustainable design solutions, we, a team of architects, artists, urbanists, architectural students, lecturers, medicine professionals from 4 different continents of the world, comes together to restructure the existing open spaces for the mental health and well-being for the city people. By using virtual platform with a smart start helped us to achieve meaningful design collaboration. We have identified 4 typologies of open spaces for strategic intervention at macro level. And on micro level, we focused on one of the typologies at Ibrahimpur, Dhaka, and applied 6 specific clever design strategies to prevent loss of open spaces, and analyzed triangular typology and its surroundings at Ibrahimpur, and generate a design scheme that complements existing structures, prevailing activities and movement dynamics, while offering integrated, accessible, environment-responsive, inclusive, and engaging public spaces. The tools of urban and landscape architectural design, along with the health promotion activities, are utilized to create a park for cultural escape, edible landscape, play escape, and equity escape for the community people. As part of the strategic intervention in the leftover spaces in Dhaka, we showed the strategic guidelines to restructure and enlarge the park and the city, nature and culture relationships during the pandemic and beyond.
And the final shortlisted team is the Future of Lifestyle Rehabilitation from Singapore.
Hi everyone, we are Team Physio from the National University of Singapore, consisting of Jaslyn, Yujia, Ziling,
and then
Our project began with the question of what if rehabilitation care can be imbued into our lifestyles in the form of a social fitness routine, while tapping into our neighbouring communities as a source of social support. With the rising trend of biophilic design in healthcare architecture and all Singaporeans expected to live within close proximity of a park by the year 2030, community parks came naturally as an ideal spot for distributed healthcare.
Clementi Woods Park is a community park in Singapore that serves as an ideal prototype to investigate the viability of field park and its potential for future extended implementation. With different zones catering to different levels of mobility and clinical needs, field park is an open playground designed for patients but made accessible to all, so that the road to recovery can be a shared experience with loved ones. The design of field huts and exercise stations adapt according to the mobility needs of patients within the zones.
An extensive network of hyper-connected technologies work hand-in-hand to support services catering to Physio Park, while reaching out to the neighboring communities as a source of social support.
In the post-pandemic age, we envision that health records will be digitally integrated into the system of PhysioLink app. AI digital triage will allocate patients with similar needs to the same therapy group, forming a familiar social group that the patients can fall back on. By introducing group therapy sessions, therapists can now attend to more patients per session. With motion trackers widening therapists' vision, micro-observations are now offloaded to physio bots. Collaboratively with bots, AR Vision projects a heads-up display with directional audio feedback to provide therapists with a first-person interface that informs him of patient's performance by enhancing his sense of spatial awareness.
The possibilities of PhysioVision can be amplified when handed over to users other than therapists. By equipping regular fitness enthusiasts with PhysioVision would allow access to an untapped pool of crowdsourced assistance. Physio can be implemented in any community park as long as it keeps the basic principles in its creation. With Physio, recreational wellness and transformative technology work together seamlessly to construct a holistic model of care providence where experiential and spatial enhancements are made in order to support the changing face of healthcare.
Hi everyone.
Okay, so I have now I have the privilege of formally introducing our competition jurors, and afterwards they would each like to share their comments on one of the three shortlisted projects. So I will start by introducing Johan Sagan. He is an associate professor of design at the master program coordinator at the Department of Design at the Faculty of Fine Art, Music, and Design at the University of Bergen. It's a mouthful. He holds a PhD in architecture from the University of California, Berkeley, and degrees in communication studies and cultural studies from the University of North Carolina and the University of Minnesota. His research critically investigates processes, theories, and ethics of design, particularly through social and economic context. He examines and uses design research, evidence-based design, design thinking, the integrative, interdisciplinary, holistic design processes to interrogate the built environment at a variety of scales, from the body adjacent to the spatial to the urban. Unfortunately, Hans is unable to be with us today, but he has shared a short video of one of the projects that he would like to share with us.
Hello, my name is Johan Sagan. I'm a professor of design at the University of Bergen in cold and rainy Bergen, Norway. I'm going to offer my thanks first to Bud and my co-panelists for going through this process with me. It was really entertaining, and I very much enjoyed working with you all, so thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd like to talk to you today about the aesthetics of non-interference, a proposal for Tarkanovo Park in Yoshkar-Ola City in Russia by Zark Architects and Associates. This is a proposal for an ecological park focusing on conservation. The area that they're looking at was a tree planting area that has grown into a real forest, but essentially has been disused for a number of years. The city of Yoshkar-Ola that hosts this park is about 285,000 people, so it's a fair, sizable city with a lot of people that could use the park. Some of the park problems is that it is located along the bed of a river called the Shoya River, which has unfortunately gone dry and is in significant need of rehabilitation. In addition, there are some technical challenges at the site. There's technical equipment, telecommunications equipment, and a heating pipe, a large bore diameter heating pipe running at about anywhere between 1 and 1.7 meters high, running east to west, bisecting the site and cutting off pedestrian north-south access. In addition, the park has poor lighting, unsafe conditions, and no amenities, despite its relatively central location in the city and high number of potential users. So this is a site, obviously, that is in need of some significant redevelopment to be useful and safe and healthy for people to use. Now, the site also has some advantages. For example, there is a lot of transit access, and since it exists in a medium density area, there's many nearby homes and businesses of users that could take advantage of the site. Now, before developing their design, the Zark architects and their team did a number of research methods, in particular site survey, and I think this was fairly robust and comprehensive. They looked at transport analysis, adjacency analysis, functional diagrams, services diagrams, routes, and pathing analysis. In addition, they went to the site, took a lot of photographs, and observed it for themselves, and backed this up with fairly robust social science research examining not only the demographics of current and possible future users, but also their current uses of the park and what they ideally would like to see included. The most popular requests were for the river to be revitalized, for the lighting to be improved, and for amenities like benches and bins and sports facilities like, for example, ski or bicycle tracks to be put into the park to increase its usefulness. Through focusing on the visual perception of the park, particularly its natural features, with in mind some of its technical and environmental constraints, the team proposed a modest set of interventions. The aesthetics of their proposal for the park are based on traditional folk culture, with concerns for support for local residents, diversity of possibility within the park, inclusivity of access, and above all, and I think this is the strongest point of the proposal, with a strategy of non-interference, doing the least to disturb the existing environmental conditions of the park while making space for the park's potential to flourish. And I think this came across quite strongly. Their design solutions are health and activity oriented, with considerations for climate in both summer and winter seasons. In inland Russia, this is obviously of an important concern. You have to design differently for winter than you would for summer. Multifunctional playgrounds provide opportunities for children for active play. A small sports ground provides an array of athletic options, a bike path snakes around the edge of the site, and the design includes a public space for artistic and cultural events, as well as a viewpoint with a raised prospect for contemplation and sightseeing. Natural site conditions are preserved and protected through the use of elevated trails and loops around standing forest. This proposed air trail is a striking red color, and it is the main element of non-interference for the design. It also serves the purpose of hiding some of the design challenges, such as the heating pipe and the telecommunications equipment, while elevating users above the forest floor and into the trees. Geometric patterns and elements reference local and indigenous ethnic cultures in, I think, a fairly sensitive way. The designers rightly promote outdoor space as a way to ameliorate the isolation and uncertainty of pandemic time, allowing people healthy outlets for their time and energy, as well as creating socially distanced opportunities for social contact, all within and above a nurtured and restored natural environment. I think this is a very exciting and interesting project. It's presented visually in a rather striking way that's almost lyrical and folk tale almost in the way that they do it, with the abundance of animals on the site. I wish the project the best success, and I hope it comes together in the future. Good luck. Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce Renelle Sargent, and she is an urban planner with 10 years experience in urban policy, public space research, and the digitization of the construction permitting system. Renelle is the founder of Public Space Global, an urban design advocacy group that has also served as a city assessor of the European City of the Year Awards. She completed her graduate studies at the University of Sheffield in the UK, and later continued her studies as a Chevening Scholar in interdisciplinary urban design at the University College of London. Her current work focuses on climate adaptation policy with the Caribbean Policy Development Center and community planning with the Ministry of Sport and Community Development in Trinidad and Tobago. And Renelle will be sharing a little of the thoughts that were discussed on Community Escape.
Thank you, Bud, for that introduction. Thank you to the design teams for joining us here today, as well as the other viewers. I really have the pleasure of introducing and talking a bit about the community escape or escape project. For the jury, this was one of the most successful proposals because they considered the value and the meaning of public space at 3 different scales. At the citywide scale, they considered the use of public spaces as green lungs, as well as the quantity of public spaces available and access to these spaces. At the neighborhood or the community or district level, they looked at the different roles that public space can play and how the public space physically connects with surrounding areas. They also looked on the site-specific scale to consider multiple treatment options and created multiple types of spaces within that one larger public space. Now, Dhaka, like many other places in the developing world, is a city that's experiencing a loss of public spaces. It's a city where, because of built development, high density development, and even encroachment of public spaces, that sense of loss is really quite palpable. And what the designers have been able to do is really consider treatment options that really address this issue of access to and preventing the loss of public spaces. Particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the city, similar to other parts of the world, have seen public spaces being barricaded, being locked off from public access, and even the erection of walls and barriers. And the designers were able to successfully deal with these treatments. And I will say how this was done. But I'll start by saying that the designers really are convincing and an evocative narrative around community health and community well-being. And they were really able to do this both graphically and through their quite evocative written descriptions. The design supports community wellness by including spaces for physical activity, whether that's walking or running or even just playing. It introduces a mini urban food system using urban agriculture as one part of its design. It also includes reminders of culture and heritage. And it also has the potential to improve air quality as well through the introduction of trees and a lot of biodiversity. In fact, that use of biodiversity, and I should really call it the way that they use nature and they utilize nature in the design, is one of the most successful aspects of their design. They were able to, quite interestingly, select particular plant types and then be able to match the animals and different species that would be attracted by those plant types, and really reintroducing nature and biodiversity into a city where there is that sense of loss of nature and loss of biodiversity. They were also able to successfully and quite interestingly deal with the issue of access to public spaces. They removed the walls, they removed the gates, they removed the barriers, and instead they created one design treatment where they used staircases, short staircases, I should say, as seating elements, spaces that would attract and entice people to actually come into and to use that space. And an active public space with many different users and uses is one of the most successful ways in which designers can introduce or prevent the loss and prevent the encroachment of public spaces. I will also say that from the designs, from the diagrams, and from the drawings, it's really clear that the design is one that is responsive to the users and responsive to their needs. They were able to identify that culture is one need in the space, food is one need in the space, play is one need in the space, and equity is a key issue within the community. So within the space, there are places for women, there are places for children, there are spaces for people to do urban agriculture and get together. And they really provide these multiple treatments and these multiple types of spaces within this one public space was really a convincing way to introduce multiple types of sociability, whether it's the thin forms of sociability where you see someone else and you can say hello, or providing benches and seating throughout where people can stop and sit and relax, and you have time to build those bonds with the persons who live in and around your local neighborhood. I will also say about this space is that we were really, really impressed with the use of diagrams, the different types of illustrations that they introduced. They used site plans, they used different icons, they used axonometric drawings, they used Photoshop illustrations. And I think all these were able to collectively tell that story of community health and community well-being. And it was clear from their proposal that it really was a multidisciplinary team and it really was a collaborative effort. So I want to congratulate the designers of Community Escape on their proposal. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Renelle, that was wonderful. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Anna Grichting. She is a Swiss architect, urbanist, and musician, and she graduated with a Doctor of Design in Urbanism from Harvard University. She is passionate about designing with nature and Mother Earth and going beyond our anthropocentric view of the world to include all living organisms in a balanced development. She was recently teaching at Qatar University, mainly to female students, whom she was committed to empowering and inspiring to become future leaders in the fields of regenerative and holistic architecture and urban design. She initiated a living laboratory at Qatar University to co-design the campus of the food, water, energy, waste nexus with a grant received from the Belmont Forum. She works in multidisciplinary research and projects that bring together the arts, the sciences, and engineering, and focuses on regenerative urban systems, food urbanism and urban biodiversity in drylands, blue urbanism and water-sensitive urban design, ecological planning and conflict landscapes, urban legacies of mega events, public art and public space. Her projects and research have taken her beyond Europe to Iran, Cyprus, Korea, Japan, Australia, the Balkans, Turkey, and the US. Her professional experience includes working with the Mayor's Office in Geneva and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. As a musician, she has produced and performed with the ensemble Desert Bridges in Qatar, Sufi Moon in Pakistan, and Border Meetings in Switzerland, and currently performs with her jazz trio, Anna Jazz and Roses in Geneva. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Bud, for this very nice introduction and also for orchestrating all the process. I really enjoyed this process with our fellow jurors. And thank you also, Mohammed, Garipur and Kathleen, for inviting me to be a jury. It was a really interesting process and also very important to discuss all these ideas and new ways of thinking that have emerged with the pandemic. The project that I will present, The Future of Lifestyle Rehabilitation, is a really interesting project and also a team that combines landscapes and architects with industrial designers. It introduces new technologies into the landscape, and it's presented as a prototype, a model that can be integrated into all parks. It's, as we've seen earlier, it's situated in Singapore. So it's maybe in some ways we could say it really responded very well to the brief of the pandemic and health. It's as the brief stated, it addresses and defines specific community and health related needs, engages community members, it proposes a physical rehabilitation program that is not only for people with physical disabilities, etc., but also that can be used by all communities and not just recovering or disabled patients. So in that sense, the project takes a sort of broader view of rehabilitation, which also includes prevention, and under the concept of social fitness and social support. it proposes the park as a path or a road to recovery. So from the health point of view, it addresses the range and ranges from the palliative and preventive care to the prevention of disease to the promotion of good health. As we know, and we probably have learned even more during the pandemic, immunity is really based on good health and on a good immune system. So this is really very important to epidemic urbanism. It's not just addressing an epidemic, but really preventing one through good health and through improving the immune system. And as we know, physical exercise is very important for that. So how does it go about this? Well, one thing, as I mentioned, it's a prototype. So it has taken a park in Singapore to design this prototype, and it's also using, as we mentioned, new technologies and robots. As you might have seen in the video. So as they called the hyper-connected technologies. So these include the autonomous shuttles, the digital application, which can actually obviously connect the users and the therapists with the users, all the different types of users. Also autonomous shuttles. So the accessibility is obviously very, very important in this project, is being able to bring people to the park, people who have reduced mobilities. So this is in the form of autonomous shuttles, which are linked obviously to the digital app. And there's also a small little animal you might have noticed called the Physio Links, which actually can accompany you through your path to recovery and through your rehabilitation. So, so these are obviously the health implications, and this was one of the factors that we were really looking at, was health implications in the design. So we can see that it's really aligned with community health needs, because it addresses different people, whether it's elderly people or people with disabilities. And I would say it also, it's defined broadly in the time of crisis. So I would even mention that it's of particular interest in this pandemic and COVID, because we don't only have these, whether we have elderly or rehabilitations that we can normally find, but we also have people recovering from the pandemic. And maybe this has not been yet very much published, but is a lot of people have what they call a long COVID, and they really do need actually to very slowly begin again their activities. And I'm actually speaking from experience, and I was very interested in this project because I had this experience myself, where when we finish our 10 days, we want to sort of get out and get back to exercise. And we realize that in fact, we have to really pace ourselves. This is where the little digital links that we saw, this little animal, it's all about pacing. And that, we learned that we have to actually start with a different type of exercise and rehabilitation. So this concept of rehabilitation, I think, is really important in the pandemic, but also obviously for all other communities, and also, as I mentioned, for prevention and just staying healthy and keeping our immune system up. Now, what they've also done, which is very interesting, is bringing nature into healthcare, or rather bringing the apparatus for exercise, which would normally be in a building, into nature. So this is in a way what this project does. It takes all these apparatus and systems and rehabilitation programs and integrates them into a park. So it does this also obviously taking care of the topography, which is very, obviously it can be very important for when one is in rehabilitation. So it's very, the topography is very well studied so that the different types of exercises are adapted. Also, to come back to also this equity and inclusion, how did they create the different zones and also program the park and also the different technologies? There was a very in-depth work to identify the users within the framework of medical rehabilitation. And what they did is they created a holistic model of the care providence, and they also took into account the rational and also the emotional needs of the caregivers and the patients. So it wasn't just the patients, but also the caregivers that were interviewed and analyzed. And also, as well as the larger communities who would be also using these installations and be using the park. And so with these interviews and people, they actually created what we would call personas. And then with these personas, as they explain the project, they give the different scenarios and they explain very well how the integration of the digital apps, the shuttles, how the caregiver and the patients are put into connection, and how they're followed around the parcours around the program and into the park. So this is very well explained also in the scenarios, is really how the program works and how this rehabilitation is how it functionally works. So now to get more into what we would call, I would say, the design innovation probably would be this, this integration of the technology into the park, bringing the rehabilitation instruments and equipment into the park, and also, obviously, yes, as we said, these technologies. So as we mentioned, it's the Clementi Wood Park, which is being used as a prototype for the model. And I will now maybe just explain a few of the zones that have been created. What I wanted to mention also is that, before I describe the zones, is that they've taken this Clementi Wood Park as a prototype, but as a model that can be implemented into the future parks of the city. And this project, in a way, is also anticipatory, as it's aligned with the vision of Singapore 2030, where all Singaporeans are expected to live within close proximity of a park. So they're also highlighting this as a model that can be integrated and will be accessible then to all the Singaporeans who would live in proximity of a park. So now to talk maybe more about the zones, which are adapted to different levels of mobility and clinical needs. They're created to cater to these, and as I mentioned, adapted also to the topography of the park. So there's a main zone and drop-off point, which also has recreational, educational activities and specialized physiotherapy equipment. So there are some small buildings. Then the zone A is for people who are able to move on their own unassisted. And so there are steeper ramps and stairs, longer transfer distances from these shuttles that bring the people there. In the zone B, it's for people who need assistance, human or mechanical, and with gradual ramps and stairs, longer transfer distances. Then another zone C for people who are able to use wheelchairs by themselves, with leveled ground, obviously, shorter transfer distances. And then the D zone for people who are unable to move by themselves, who are wheelchair bound, with a totally level ground and shorter transfer distances. So we see that, all of the zones have been really thought of in the topographical approach and design, and also for the different forms of mobility. So obviously there's also there are places for exercising, for resting. There's also hydrotherapy, so the sort of pool for hydrotherapy, and a cafe. So we also find, obviously, what you would find in a park for, other visitors, which would be also the cafes, etc. So as what the concluding statement that they give is that it's what they call physio, which is their system or model, recreational wellness and transformative technology work together seamlessly to construct a holistic model of care providence, where experiential and spatial enhancements are made in order to support the changing face of healthcare. I think I will conclude here. I could have gone further to maybe describe more the personas, etc. But I think for the questions of time, I think I'll leave it there, and we can probably discuss it more in the discussions. Thank you.
Anna, that was fabulous. It reminds me, as both of you were speaking, why it was so difficult to come to like a winner, right? Because these projects are all just incredible projects, and each of them really have taken time to like dig into issues that are local and sensitive to those populations, but at the same time very universal. So I really appreciate the comments that you provided on this project. So with that being said, it is my pleasure and honor to announce the winning team of the 2021 Epidemic Urbanism's Initiative for Public Parks competition. And the winner is Community Escape, with team members from Bangladesh, Alberta, Australia, Portugal, and I want to congratulate them along with the honorable mentions, because those were all just fabulous projects. And with that said, if I know we're pushing a little bit of time, but I would like to open this up for discussion a little bit on why, and some of it's already been said, but open up to why this particular project was the one that was selected as the winner. And again, because Hans isn't here, he provided just a short video, and then I would love to get everyone else talking about this as well. So if we could cue up Hans's video here.
The winning project, Community Escape, I thought was particularly strong in how it was very specific about how it would solve various issues at the site, such as health promotion, activation of dying space, inclusiveness, environmental protection, protecting safety, and so on. Not only how it would deal with it in design solutions, but in the specific forms that these solutions would take. I thought that was very compelling, and they were arguing from a position of clearly having done their research and made some excellent insights into what they could do, down to the level of which specific plants had particular effects in different areas of their proposed space. So it would be very exciting to see this project come together, and I think that they definitely deserve their place as the winner of this competition. Very well done. The winning
So I guess the only other thing I would add to that is, because we have heard a lot about this project, not only would I like to hear a little bit more maybe on why this was selected, although I think it's pretty evident already, but like what's the impact overall of all of these projects? Because we're only able to share 3 of them, but there were a lot of projects, and I think thinking about the like weight of what has been put on our lap, and some of the innovation that has been thought of and really kind of contemplated is worth discussion as well. And I will open that up.
Maybe I could just jump in just to say a couple words, a little bit about the DACA proposal, Community Escape, but about the wider things we learned about health during this process. For me, that proposal in DACA, it really shows that public space and community space is a vital resource, particularly in contexts where they're scarce. That proposal is really a model that could be used throughout the Global South to redefine the relationships between people and public spaces and play all the multiple roles that we need public spaces to play. But I will also say we saw some really interesting things coming out of South Africa, the medicinal garden, and putting those kinds of spaces in within a public space. I think that's really, really quite interesting. I really liked one of the proposals that we saw in Australia as well, where the designers considered that they are existing within a neighborhood with migrants, where there are issues around privacy, but at the same time, when you accommodate privacy, you can also accommodate sociability within one public space as well. Also very interesting. I really like, we got a proposal from Belgium. I had a lot of time thinking about the concept of solitude. It was something that they stressed, and minimal interventions in public spaces, but encouraging quiet, creating a type of seating that could be moved and removed from the public space as well. So those are just very quickly, those are some of the things that I really enjoyed, and I learned about health and treating equity within the public space.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I obviously agree with your comments, Renelle, as well. And maybe just to say a few words about Community Escape. I was also particularly impressed also of the collaboration of the designers and how multidisciplinary they were and how they collaborated also all across the world. I really enjoyed seeing that map of all these different designers and many different disciplines of design together. So I thought that was really also it's a great example of how one can collaborate around the world. And also, yes, I think it's been said, but the multifunctional aspect of the park is very, very well designed and very well curated, as we can see in this slide. The different functions, and particularly, obviously, one that interests me is the edible landscape, and I think that's really particularly important, not just in the global south, but I think everywhere, and especially with more and more fragile communities. The access to these community gardens and food gardens, being able to plant food. Is both educational, but also really is a livelihood for many people. So I wanted also to commend that, and I also found that in the projects in South Africa, one which was even the title was Education, Rejuvenation through Education, and these were also regeneration of these very large parks, which included, many different functions, integrating, the cattle and the food growing, the culture. They were also really very multifunctional, and it was actually, as I think Bud and Renelle and Johan all mentioned, it was not easy really to even come up with a shortlist, because the other projects, I really want to thank all the other designers and entrants, because really they all had very different qualities. And maybe I'll mention one which was a very, very small project. I think there was just one designer. It was in Vietnam, and it was a very I will just try to find the name of it. It was a very small park, and it was actually linking an existing public space into an empty lot with this sort of red structure, very sort of Asian Oriental, and so it was really a kind of a pocket park, but it was this kind of creating this connection and creating this space. Where people could meet, and also, it could keep a certain distance, and it was bridging also the road, etc. So it was a very, very small project, but I think you could also see that it could have actually a very big impact on a local space, and also, with a sort of iconic and sculptural element. Sometimes it's also about, just changing the perception and the structure of a space. So I'll end there, because I want to also leave some time for the other discussants and for Nomi as well. Looking forward to your comments.
I think that's probably a good segue, isn't it, Naomi? Does that work for you?
That works for me. Thank you.
Excellent.
I want to thank Caitlin and Mohammed for inviting me. This has been just such a treat to be a part of this project and take part in this conversation, as well as the wider conversations around design and public space and urbanism and nature and how that all relates to the pandemic. And so it's really a treat for me, and it's great to be with Bud and Renelle and Anna as well. So as I was looking through the projects and kind of thinking back on the last couple of years, one of the things that struck me was that all of these projects were relevant before COVID and really were award-winning or could have been award-winning even before that. But that the pandemic has made us look at parks and nature in a new way. And it also comes at the same time when we're seeing more and more disasters from climate change and more people, especially those who are vulnerable, needing nature and not having access to nature. And so kind of the confluence of the pandemic and disasters from climate change have made us realize just how important nature is, and also just how much those disadvantaged people and communities don't have access to nature, and that there's this huge health disparity. And, even though for many of us, this is our first time in a global, well, pandemic is generally global, but this isn't new, right? Pandemics have been going on for centuries. And the most recent one for most of us was the 1918 flu, often called the Spanish flu. And there are definitely parallels. Sarah Jensen Carr, who is a colleague at Northeastern University in Boston, she just finished a book called The Topography of Wellness. And I just heard a really interesting conversation between her and James Corner and Jenny Rowe and other scholars about the role of nature during the pandemic. And Sarah, having just written this book, Dr. Carr, she talks about the similarities between say the tuberculosis epidemic and then the flu of 1918 epidemic. And that especially with the flu pandemic, the 1918, there was this concerted effort between public health experts and epidemiologists and architects and planners and landscape architects to combine their efforts and create places of parks and living spaces and schools where people would be as healthy as possible. And Frederick Law Olmsted, who people think of as the father of landscape architecture in this country, he worked for the US Sanitary Commission before he became a landscape architect, and that was the predecessor to the American Red Cross. And he really viewed, and he's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We know, so there were some issues with him as a person. But as a designer and someone who had this connection with public health, he really saw parks as the lungs of the city. And it's so interesting that I think it was is it Tarkhanova Park in Russia? That park is called the lungs. So people already think of that as the lungs of the city. And so not only did he think of nature as this way for people to be healthier physically and also emotionally, he really thought of parks as providers of good mental health. But also socially, they were democratic spaces. They were places where people from all walks of life could come together and not be discriminated against. And one thing that Sarah pointed out in this talk, and she also talks about in her book, is that the wealthy people in the city, and this was in the time of rapid industrialization, they had gardens in their homes or near their homes, and they also had country estates that they could escape to. The poor and the working class, they didn't have that. So Central Park, Prospect Park, these other parks, or even cemeteries before then, like Mount Auburn Cemetery, those were the places that everyone could go. And I think, what Bud said about parks as essential services and what Ronell said about these parks and other green spaces as vital community services, that really rings true. And then, so in the pandemic, there's lots of talk before that about nature deficit disorder and kids being, tied to their phones and devices. And one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that so many people, I think, have fallen in love with nature again and have realized that it is an essential service, as Bud said, that it's not just kind of icing on the cake or something that's nice to go to, or nature as like something you go to once a year to visit the Grand Canyon or whatever your, big, awesome nature place is. But like the tree that's outside your window, or the little pocket park, or the little garden that your neighbor has 2 streets away that you could go and enjoy the butterflies as they land on the blossoms. That is critical. And, I think early on in the pandemic, when people were quarantined all over the world, most cities still encouraged people to get to nearby nature. Go for a walk around the block, go outside for 10 minutes, get away from your family, get some fresh air, get some exercise. And so parks became gyms, they became dining rooms, schools, offices. They really served this function that had been in all different locations, and home was just for home and family. And then the more that we learned about the science of this particular coronavirus and COVID-19, the more we realized that outside really was safer than most interior spaces that weren't well ventilated. And so then people started thinking, yeah, I really do want to go outside and stay outside. And people started designing outdoor classrooms. And I'm working on an NSF grant where we're providing Wi-Fi in a public space, in a green space and park, realizing that, people need to use the outdoors as offices, as schools, as an outdoor living room. And I think that that's going to continue. And that's something that I saw with all of these projects. And I'll say one more thing kind of generally. One of my co-editors at Health and Environment's Research and Design Journal, we recently gave a talk on COVID-19 and evidence-based design. And she said, we don't know what the next pandemic will be. We know that there will be another pandemic. We know that we're getting ready for other natural disasters, but we don't know. Maybe it's going to be more like Ebola. Maybe it's going to be more another airborne. But we do know that we need open space, and that is going to help nurture us. And Anna, I really appreciated when you were talking about nature also as an immune booster. So if you think about salutogenic design for health, rather than just design to ameliorate what's already broken or people who are already sick, we absolutely need nature. And one thing that I really appreciated about all of the 3 projects was their view of these parks as salutogenic design features, as multitasking spaces that people could exercise in, people could meet in, they could play in at very different scales. And this is something that, parks are essential services for people. They are also essential services for the city and for, the broader city as well. And I think it was the Dhaka project. It was astonishing how few green spaces there are in that city. And while that may be astonishing now, for those of us who still have so many green spaces, I live in DC, unfortunately, we have a lot of green space, but the world is urbanizing rapidly. And I think there's like 75% of the population is going to be in cities by 2050. That's right around the corner. And so more and more of our cities are going to be like Dhaka. And what are we going to do as a civilization to allow these parks, whether they're large, as these 3 projects were, or small, or that we can take components from those 3 projects? I think, Anna, you were talking about that the one park could be kind of a prototype and be used in smaller spaces as well. And I think we're going to need to learn how to do that and to look at the parks as providing not just social health services, but also ecosystem services for things like runoff and oxygen and reducing the heat island effect. And so that even when people can't get to a park that day, they're still benefiting from the ecosystem service to people and to the planet that those spaces provide. So I think I will leave off for here. There's lots more that I can say about the specific projects or kind of contrasting and comparing. I'll just say one more thing, which is that I was so impressed with the graphics of all of them. And, you know, as an educator, I am so excited to bring these to my students and show them how, how amazing people can be with the representation of their design. And I will give it back to all of you, and I look forward to having a conversation with you. And I see that we've got one really good question already. So thank you again. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. That was wonderful. You know, it's funny, just piggybacking on that, just from a kind of personal experience. I'm here in Nebraska. I live very close to a park that has swings and slides and all of those things. And I remember as soon as, you know, when this all first hit us and everyone went into this kind of panic mode, they started taking out all the playground equipment. They were like wrapping it so that people wouldn't get on it. And then within 6 months or so, they realized, wait a minute, we need to get all that stuff back in, because they realized that it's actually staying inside that was really not advantageous for us as healthy human beings. So, you know, like initial reactions sometimes may not be placed in the right place, but we've all come back to realize what an essential part parks play within our society and our health. Not only ours, and I think it was mentioned a couple of times, but also of vegetation, other animals, and everything else. So yeah, I think that's all great conversation. So I see we have questions down there. Is that right, Caitlin? Let me see here. So I see a question. It says, question to discussion: what in post-COVID-19 future will be the role of governments and other official institutes in planning and development of parks and green public spaces in urban territory? Does anyone want to?
Well, maybe I can jump in if you don't mind. I would say that I would see it, and especially listening to the discussions today and the comments by Nomi, that I think that they will become more and more a priority public spaces, I think. And I think also that participation, as we've seen in most of the projects we presented, the Russian, the Dakar, and the one I presented, that, you know, the participation and the user, you know, engaging users, etc. So I think it's going to be the governments, but I think it's also going to be engaging with the community, and I really feel that that's where we're going. Just to maybe give a short answer and comment.
I could probably just add something to that. At least from my experience, in some countries, there really is a disconnect between people and governments. Because people ask for public spaces, they want public spaces, they need green spaces, they want places where they can do all those physical activities and meet their neighbors and meet their friends. But at the same time, there are many governments, whether local or national, they're focused on economic development, build development. Construction may be an important part of the economy. So I think that disconnect between the two sides needs to be fixed if we really are to see public spaces as essential resources and something that governments encourage more. They create the policies and the regulations which encourage it in the private sector. And I think communities and people themselves can go a long way by pushing for and demanding these spaces as well.
Yeah, and Renelle, I'll build off of that. I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I thought was successful about all three of the projects was this goal of making people fall in love with their park for all different reasons. So the the one in Dhaka, it's a place for women and children to go to and play and socialize. And it's also providing these ecosystem services. For the one in Russia, no matter what the season, even if it's freezing cold in the winter, there are things to do, there are places to go. And then the one in Singapore that's really seen as this almost like an outdoor rehabilitation space. And it's using universal design principles so that it's designed first for the most vulnerable. And then, of course, everyone else benefits from that as well. There's some good research that when children become engaged with nature and fall in love with nature from an early age, then they're much more likely to be stewards of nature in the future. And, not only like going up and picking up trash, but also voting and paying taxes and, supporting initiatives that then support nature and voting for politicians and, government, going back to the question, initiatives for supporting parks. So Ronelle, kind of like what you were saying, that it sometimes has to come from the bottom up to influence those decision makers and those policy makers. Sometimes it can come from the top down or both, and they meet in the middle. But if no one has an example of green space that they feel close with and connected with, then people won't demand it.
Maybe if I can just give an example that actually might illustrate quite well what you said, Nomi, and builds on what Ronelle also said, is one of the Aga Khan award-winning landscapes in the last session was the public space program in Tatarstan, and I was actually the technical reviewer. What's interesting here is it was actually when they started one of the projects for public parks. It was a program in all of Tatarstan that was being rolled out for public spaces, and they accidentally cut down a willow that was 100 years old, and that was the symbol of a park where everybody took their photos for the weddings and etc. And there was an uproar of the community because this was, it was like it was a personality. And so the person who was leading this, Natalia Fishman, this young lady who was actually leading the whole design process, she realized, she said, we really have to consult the community. So it was kind of this tragedy and disaster that started off this participative process, and she said, well, we're not designing just to make the architects happy, etc., but we're really here also to design for the people. So what the effect of this, as you were saying, the bottoms up, is that now participative design for public spaces is now being is compulsory in the whole of Russia. So it's really interesting to see how this program in Tatarstan, this willow tree, this tragedy, has now really scaled up and has made participatory public space planning compulsory in the whole of Russia. So I just wanted to illustrate really what you said with an example, because we know that, some systems and governments and, aren't necessarily always participating and democratic. But there is progress being made, and as you said, sometimes it is that push, or maybe it's a small disaster that that gives a push to a process, a participative process. So we're actually going to be editing a book on that. It's called How a Willow Tree Changed Russia. It's the title of the book.
That sounds amazing. Wow, that's a great story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So this isn't necessarily about parks, but it's on the same idea of green spaces. I'm sure all of you have similar examples of this, but I'm thinking even within where I live, again, like when everything started shutting down, restaurants were closing down, the ones that came back were ones that took advantage of green space. And so now, even when we go out, it's either we're outside in these kind of open areas outside of restaurants and bars, or and I feel like now that all of our front yards have also become this like public green space where like that's where we meet all the time. We'll have like meals in yards. So have in areas that maybe you might not, although we do have a lot of land out in Nebraska, but excuse me, but like really the desire now to be in those kind of open spaces because we realize we're healthier in those. And again, like I said earlier, like redeveloping some of these parks and maybe even in the example I gave earlier where they were taking away equipment because they were afraid of germs and everything else, like how does that make us rethink parks and the design of those in a much different way? So some of the stuff that is coming out of this is, I think, extremely advantageous. And I would go back to Naomi's comments on just, and really everyone's comments on all of the work that we saw and the amount of work they put into it, but also just like they all had a lust and a dream. They weren't just like, oh, we have a competition and hopefully this gets in. You could tell they were very passionate proposals. And I do think that, and I mentioned this when I was speaking earlier, I think it has to do with the way the brief was written, that it has to be in their place. Like if it was in Nebraska, like I would be the only one that could really write to that. But like people really want to be, they want their own space. They want to design those things. And it gets back into community as well, like having it yours and really and creating that. So that's what I found very inspirational and excited to see all that stuff. And again, I think also the graphics were beautiful. I'm going to take them to my students as well. Some of them were, surprisingly, like something I would never consider. So again, just kind of throwing into the pleasure of like being in this whole process. It's been incredible. So other comments, questions?
Well, I just wanted to, because I didn't mention the graphics of the project that I was presenting about the rehabilitation, and I wanted to also really commend the graphics in this, and I thought it was really very refreshing. It had a touch of, the Asian Singapore, something that, coming out of their cultural way of drawing and designing, and there was just one image at the end which was done with a realistic rendering. But I think I really appreciate the fact that we're not using this realistic rendering all the time. And I thought that was really interesting and very refreshing, as many of you have mentioned the graphics. But I just wanted to also commend that for the project that I saw, and that it wasn't all these realistic graphics necessarily, but it was really a unique style. And I thought like the Russian one, also very culturally rooted.
And I think you bring up another thing is like, so the submission that you were, well, we all reviewed it, but the one that you talked about, in the conversations we've been having, not a lot of that conversation has been around technology, but I really thought it was interesting how they were able to marry those in a way that promoted health. For me, that was pretty powerful in that project, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, also the fact, yes, that they teamed up with industrial designers. I think that's, we hadn't seen that in landscape. And I thought that was really, really stretching this idea of interdisciplinarity and, having to engage to really come up with new ideas. Yeah. And that it's very realistic, and and what I really liked about it, and I didn't go into more into that, but if you see the actual design pages, you can see the faces of the people. So you have this very high tech, and you have this little Lynx robot, but you also have these real people who are interviewed and who are the actors of the park. And I think I thought that was also very important, that there was really high technology, but also real engagement with the emotional and functional needs of the people, and those two things coming together, as well, of course, of a good design. But that really was very rich.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think several of you have talked about the cultural specificity of these designs. And that, the Lynx robots and the use of technology, I think not everyone in every country or culture would be comfortable with that level of technology or with robots running around the park yet. But I think many of us have seen the videos of Singapore where those little robot dogs, they were going around and telling people, you're not socially distancing enough. And so that's something that is accepted and even welcome. And like parks in Korea, they have a lot of these exercise stations, which in this country, some places have them, some places don't. They're often not maintained very well, but that's very culturally accepted in Korea. And so, using that technology, as long as people are ready for it, and perhaps, if there's a good precedent in one country and it works well and it gets people engaged in ways that they weren't before, then other countries start to say, oh yeah, maybe that is a good idea. And Renelle, what did you find about your the project that was the Russian project, right? That you reviewed and talked about?
No, that Hans was the one who looked at that, but the Russian project was actually one of my favorites as well. I think maybe Bud may have mentioned it. The graphics in that one were really, really excellent. We thought that maybe they had some fine artists on board because they really, really look good. I will also shout out maybe another one of the projects where I thought the graphics were excellent as well. Although we did not shortlist that one, we only had 3 slots. But there was a project in Sri Lanka, I believe, which some really, really excellent graphics. And not just in the multiple ways in which they were able to illustrate the space, but also the way in which they represented the context. They represented the context of nature. So you saw all the green and blue spaces, some really, really lovely drawings of different birds and animals within the space as well. But then if you looked very closely at some of the drawings, you saw things like an airplane in the background, you saw boats in the background to really illustrate that this site is very, very close to an airport, it's very close to the sea as well. So I thought that was an excellent use of graphics as well, although they were not shortlisted.
I wanted to quote, this is a very short quote, it's by James Corner, who's a landscape architect and planner, and he's the principal of field operations, which is known for the High Line among many, many other projects. And in the new landscape declaration, which was put together by the Landscape Architecture Foundation, he said, and I'm going to quote him, "If you love nature and the countryside, choose to live in the city." And many of us are living in the city, or we are going to have to live in the city. But the thing is, if you choose to live in the city, then you have to bring nature into the city. We are social creatures. We are also part of nature. And we cannot live in a city that has no nature. And so the more that urbanization happens, the more important but as you said, essential and vital those nature spaces are going to be. And I think all 3 projects did a really good job of showing how nature could be brought into city in large spaces, or again, as Anna, you pointed out, sort of taking off bite-sized pieces of those prototypes. And, maybe it's an urban street tree planting, maybe it's a pocket park, but infusing nature into the city so that everyone has access and so that it's as equitable as possible and as resilient as possible for people and nature.
I just had, before we wrap up, one more thing I'll maybe say. I just had a thought as you talked about nature. What might be really interesting coming out of this exercise would be to look at those 17 public park projects and maybe pull out the different ways in which they treated nature and they use nature. One thing I've noticed or maybe discovered is that a lot, at least particularly in the Caribbean, a lot of the designers and a lot of the persons involved in the construction industry, they don't necessarily know how to use nature. A tree is something that's pretty cheap. Putting in grass is pretty cheap, but it's not something that they necessarily know how to do. So I think maybe this is a forum, one avenue to kind of introduce some of these principles to a wider audience. So just add that as well.
I love that idea. So Caitlin and Mohammed, you have your next project now. I would also love to see a book I mean, it was just such a pleasure looking at these three projects and then looking through the other entries as well, and so inspiring. And, you know, the images, but also the text and the thinking that went behind it. And, you know, not everyone has the pleasure of sitting down with 6 amazing intellectuals and having this conversation, but to at least pick up a book and then be able to pass the book to your colleagues and your students and your family, I think would be. So talk to Wiley or Routledge or one of those publishers and get them on board.
Naomi, I agree. I think my students would love to have, like, be able to see all the different ways people are representing things, how they're tackling problems all over the world at different levels, who they're collaborating with. I absolutely agree. Like, and there was, obviously, this is just one of 4 competitions that happened. So like putting that together could be really quite fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for such a robust conversation. It's quite interesting. This is the 4th review that we are having, but each time we get so excited that we call each other and say, you know, it was, I mean, we don't feel tired anymore. And I think it's all because of obviously the hard work that you have done in the last 2 months and all this great perspective that Naomi you brought to this panel. And this is not the end of it. So it's a beginning of something else. So we'll just continue this work.
That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you. I mean, conferences and symposia and these competitions, they are, I don't know whether most people realize how much work they are. And it's not like this is your only job. So I'm just so appreciative that you pulled together people from so many different countries and occupations. It's very impressive. And I'm really grateful to have this small part in it. So thank you both, Caitlin and Mohammed.
So much. It was not small. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I also just want to one more time just thank all of the submissions, all the teams that sent in proposals. Again, I mean, I know we've gone on and on about them, how great they were, but just really want to thank you for the amount of work you guys put into that this project and really made this an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, great. I agree. And I wanted to thank you also, Bud, for all the work orchestrating us in all the different time zones. It wasn't easy for you.
That was not easy.
Together. It was not easy, and you really prepared everything very well for us. And so thank you very much. And of course, thank you to Mohammed and Kathleen for the invitation and for creating all this. Yes. And it was great to meet you, Renelle, and also Nomi, a great pleasure. And Johan, wherever he is. So thank you.
Hopefully getting better.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks so much.
Yes.
So hi from Switzerland.
Thank you so much. And you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.